Good afternoon and welcome to the Scrutiny Management Committee meeting. Minutes of previous meeting. Do we agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Yes. Do we have any apologies for absence for today? Councillor Zaman? I'm not sure. Is she outside?
She was outside.
Oh, right, okay. So maybe she's on her way. Does any councillors have any interest to declare? No. And all items are to be held in public. Deputations, petitions and public question time. This is on the agenda if any members of the public wish to raise any items with scrutiny. Any suggestions that you'd like to put forward? Item 7 then, effective regional working in Kirklees. Angela, I think you're okay for this item. Can I you? Do you have anything you want to say before we go on to your questions?
I'll quickly go through the report and answer you that not ready for our actual data science director of family skills. I came to the last overview and scrutiny meeting in February with the first joining organisation, and we talked about what was expected from regional work and how we wanted to take that forward. And what I agreed at that meeting is that it would, or offered at that meeting, is that it would be best to come here every quarter and update on the current position and how we're moving on our relationship and on the journey with external funding influence and strategic direction, etc. with Josh first. So this is the first.
Yeah, can I just interject? I think there's only me that was on the panel.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the first quarter update, and what we've done there, being conscious that there's a lot of new members on the panel, has given quite a bit of background, so it's a bit repetitive of what was in the last report and the initial parts of it. So just to set out the context of our expectations of the relationship with the City Region West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and what the purpose of that relationship is, and what we hope to gain from it. So in para 2.8, the report sets out why Regional West continues to be important for Kirklees and its communities. And going into 2.10, it talks about the amount of funding that we've been successful in achieving through our relationship with West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And the report says 140 million, but actually I've got details of all the schemes that we've gone through, and it is 170 million of support to Kirklees. Just to give you a bit of context and some breakdown of that, and I can provide this information in that format on a spreadsheet for you. We've had 2.9 million for growing business, 14.2 million for skilled people and better jobs, 5.6 million towards housing and regeneration. The biggest pot that we have made available to us is the West Yorkshire Transport Fund, which is 146 million. And then we've had 1.2 in economic resilience, which has been predominantly around natural flood management. So that's the committed funding. Some of those schemes are still in very early stages, especially the transport ones where we've done quite a lot of modelling work. We've done a lot of consultation to go through. So in terms of spend on the transport funding, we're currently only at 25 million on that. But going into the first year of major delivery will be next year, with the A62 being the first of those schemes going forward. Cooper Bridge is the biggest scheme that we've got in the programme under West Yorkshire Combined Authority at 69 million, but that one is still in the early stages of development and modelling work still taking place, and that's to get the final design before we got to consultation. We've also have allocation of 3 enterprise zones, Lindsay West and East and Lower Park. Lindsay West is delivered, and we're on site at Lower Park now with the first business confirmed on there, which is West Kirk, which is an aerospace manufacturing component part industry. They're a current Kirklees company, but they're expanding onto that site. The feedback I've had from Caddicks who are running the Lower Park site is that the interest is really, really positive, and they're expecting that will be fully built out within the next 2 years. I think the first one's due to be on site by November this year. We're obviously also working with West Yorkshire Combined Authority on the energy strategy, which is obviously become much more important as well now that they've also declared climate emergency. We're looking at how we can work across West Yorkshire in taking that forward and introducing the measures that need to be introduced. The report at section 3 talks about some of the key issues and how we can improve our working together. I think one of the main things for us is that we're still getting papers quite last minute, so to prepare proper briefings for our representatives on the meetings is still not being done as effectively as we would like it to be. So for the time to do that. From Kirklees' point of view, I think it's for us to be really, really clear on what our priorities are going forward and to make sure that they're reflected fully in West Yorkshire's thinking and strategic development. At the moment we've probably got too many priorities and we need to really focus on what are the key things that we want to be working with West Yorkshire Combined Authority on and making sure we really plan on that. Paragraph 3.5 lists our series of asks to West Yorkshire Combined Authority and that's things that we're discussing right now. In terms of how we manage this internally as a council, what I've found since I came into the role is that our engagement with WIC has been across lots of different departments, so the coordination of that has been not as comprehensive and coherent as it should be, so we're trying to put that through my team now, so we'll be the single point of contact into WIC and we'll flow that information in to make sure that we've got consistency across teams in what we're discussing with them and to make sure that the feedback from the committees is coming to the right place to make sure we can think about the actions from that and taking that relationship forward. So really just trying to strengthen that partnership through our service area. And paragraph 3.9 talks about the objectives and outcomes for regional work in the next 12 months and I'm happy to talk through this and there's no questions.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, thanks for that. I'm obviously pleased to see the mention of the climate emergency in the report. I guess what I'd be really interested to know is things like the West Yorkshire Transport Fund. We've only just signed the climate emergency. We have a target to reduce emissions to net zero by 2038, just 20 years on, which means a halving of carbon emissions every 5 years. It's huge. It is, if it's understood, it's a huge sense. So my question is really what are the things, in light of that, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing, that we are doing at the moment? Because you would imagine that there are some things there that we shouldn't be investing in now. I've got one or two ideas. And maybe that money should be reinvested in other places. So I'm particularly interested in the West Yorkshire Transport Fund and how that's applied. The other aspect of this is the mention of the build programme and there's mention of funding that's being used for housing. What are the standards that we're going to be applying for funding that comes from the regional level? How are we going to, how will those reflect a climate emergency? So the thing that concerns me is that I'm on the Leeds City Region Green Economy panel. And I'm very aware of the funding which is spent there. What concerns me is the funding that's spent in other places that's in the City Region. So it's that way of establishing some sort of rigour and process which shows that, oh crikey, we're not going to be able to do that because that's incompatible with a climate emergency. So that sort of thinking, that sort of approach is something I'd like to see.
I'm not wanting to respond by answering the question by asking one, but obviously climate emergency in terms of West Yorkshire Combined Authority was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? Yep. When at the meetings that they have on that agenda, are they discussing about the impact of schemes and how they're going to build that into this is what I'm doing, but sometimes that information's not flowing in and out, it's just how the next year will.
I don't know. What I do know is that the Leeds City Region Green Economy Panel has almost got a scrutiny role to look at all policies. It's not, I don't know if officially it's titled, but it's but we can look at the whole policies, and it's Leeds City Region as opposed to just West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Yes.
So it's a much wider aspect. So we look at regional, the way we're applying regional funding in other places, and that will have a role to say things about what's going on. But it would be good if the process, if there was a reflective process, I think looking at current investments and saying, actually, do we really want to encourage Leeds Bradford Airport to be a bigger and better and worse in carbon terms airport?
Yeah, and if we do, what we're going to do is the opposite benefit of that in other ways, isn't it? Yeah.
It's.
I don't think, in all honesty, I don't think that's been built into the process yet. I've not seen a detailed appraisal system of how they're appraising projects.
Yeah.
And I don't, from my experience to date, it's not a consistent appraisal system. They seem to develop different ones for different schemes. And that's where really this is going to need to be built into appraisal for new schemes and considered the same way we've talked about needing to be part of our decision-making process.
Sure.
Yeah.
They'll have an insurance framework.
They've got an insurance framework, yeah. But sometimes when transport and assistance funds, probably the one that was big about in the nurse experience, they received a huge amount of interest, obviously, and requests for funding from transport assistance fund that they went away and went through them and they prioritised them and came back with some proposals, which we didn't agree with, so we challenged it, but we didn't get any sight of what they were appraising it against to come to those conclusions. And that's one of the things that when we've talked about transparency and appraisal processes, that's one of the things that we're really referring to. Actually, we need to be a proper appraisal process would involve partners being on the table, and we would have somebody sat in that appraisal team and being part of it, because we know our schemes better than anybody else's, and we've got questions. And sometimes, we're quite good at providing detail to West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we provide quite a lot of detail when we put our business case forms, and sometimes that's been to our detriment, because we've been good at what we do and we provide a lot of information, which actually then leads to more questions, but it's just, that's a transparency thing that we need to challenge going forward.
I would like to ask you on 2.13, it mentions that Kirklees businesses, we've had a fair bit of business growth in Kirklees. Are you able to tell us whether they are new businesses or whether they're existing businesses, and are we proactively seeking new businesses in that area?
Yeah, I can get those figures for you. I do know that it's predominantly existing businesses through the business growth programme. There are some startups in there as well, but I think the biggest percentage is existing businesses. But I can get those figures for you. Out of the funding, so there's £70 million in the business support programme. The economic services grants, and out of that, 7.8 million of that is coming to Kirklees businesses, to our SMEs. I can get you a breakdown of which of those are existing and which are new.
Yeah, just building on previously about various funds that are operating across West Yorkshire, the city region in particular, the transport. It's interesting what you're saying about, does it seem like we can evaluate properly the effectiveness of the projects? I think that's what's two things I want to look at. Clearly there's emphasis on how the city region partnership work is working for the region as a whole. Then you can probably measure some increased economic activity and connectivity. But how does that get out to all the various parts of
I think the evaluation would be quite good. It's the appraisal system that actually gets the appraisal done. When we're appraising schemes to allocate funding, that's where we need some transparency. In terms of evaluating the effectiveness of the scheme, actually there with the economic unit is pretty good at capturing the benefits of the funding.
hasn't
So,
it?
yes,
Been-
yeah, that's a different challenge altogether.
Yeah, that's part of the holistic approach, isn't it? In that you need to
We
make
know
sure
we're not
that-
going to get everything in, because there's not enough money for us to fund everything. It's just making sure that we're in the best position possible to get our schemes up there and priorities. We do quite well in comparison to our neighbouring authorities. We do quite well. We maybe don't do as well in comparison to Leeds and Bradford, but we do in terms of hold up our weight. We do that as well.
Then how do we, so not only in terms of limited the funding we're getting, but how is that working for the people who care for us? And how's it working for the people in the situation as far as
Right, yes, capturing as well.
Yeah.
Benefits, yeah.
So is there a way of doing
Well, that's all part of the business case programme put that in.
Right.
And so we've got to put the economic benefits as a big part of that. So it's the connectivity is a huge part of what's the economic benefit in terms of jobs, in terms of moving people around the borough a bit easier, and some of those, the community benefits in terms of employment opportunities, that's all part of what we measure the schemes on. So that is, we do quite a lot of detail on that, and some consult, especially on the migrant schemes, go through quite a lot of different stages and consultations to make sure that they've got resident buy-in in different areas. Permanent's been a bit of an example of that, where the scheme was proposed, it's not accepted, so it's back to the drawing board, and we've reflected what the community says.
I probably do have to say that I was chair of Scrutiny. Like that for a few months. One of the things that I did work on was the Issuance Framework, which is how I know they have it. But one of the things I wanted to ask was in relation to governance and information within Kirklees. Because if you go and look on the Combined Authorities website, you can see the projects that are happening. But what transparency is there for people and what councillors in Kirklees to know what projects are where? Because they have several gateways, don't they, where the projects go through. If they get to Gateway 2, for instance, the business case and things like that. And so but there isn't any transparency within Kirklees as to the projects and where they are. So how many of us know, unless there's been a consultation, like for instance Cooper Bridge or Oliver, that there are transport projects happening within West Yorkshire, and where they are with those. We get minutes at full council, but that's after the event, isn't it? And that's only on the Combined Authority. That's not on the investment committee where the decisions are made. And the investment committee don't have Combined Authority don't have a facility for members of the public or ward councillors to go and speak at that meeting. So how do we know that these projects are happening and B, feed into that process? How does it generally work? No. And this is my question. Because if there's a big project that we have launched a consultation on, then surely councillors would be informed of that. But if it's not, if we haven't launched a consultation, then how do we know this happening?
Routes, I guess, would be through the leadership of the council. And so, Brian, I think, is on the investment committee for transport. And so these are accessible routes into
this is, we're talking about greater transparency at Combined Authority. It's also transparency the other way as well, isn't it?
Do we only have one now?
No, there's a structure chart in your papers that tells you who's represented on the acquisition panel.
So the investment committee is generally transport, isn't it?
Yes.
But just do some grants, is it? How should I want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about something else.
All right,
so
okay.
if
All
you
right,
still want to
so-
cover this bit.
So how can we, as councillors and members of the public, know what's happening that might be in Kirklees or affect Kirklees? This is how would that be fed back?
If I can pick that up with you, that means have a look at how we can do that and then put in place.
Yeah. Because having the minutes is all right, but that's
So that's just in case I've missed something and there's something there that I'm not aware of. I just
Yeah, we get an email that we from the chair of the transport committee. There's a bulletin that goes out from the chair of the transport committee, but that's just telling us about rail and bush and things like that. It's not telling us about a lot about investment.
One of the things I've suggested in the past is that for Wicklow, that we have an annual meeting of Wicklow where all the councillors from all authorities sign up the business plan. And so we actually have an opportunity there to put amendments in, put proposals in, and have some there. We could do it in Harrogate or somewhere like that, or a large conference centre. There's lots of places we could actually do such a thing, and which would take the numbers of councils that we've got. But it would actually make transparent by the very fact that such a conference of local authorities coming together exists. It would bring that transparency forward.
I think I'm talking about a more day-to-day. Yeah. You know, to me, it could be too late. It could be too late if you had a.
So you could go into the system and you know,
But you can put
a spreadsheet of project type of
Or
thing.
something comes through and says, right, okay, there's this scheme that's happening on a West Yorkshire level. It has the potential for this, and this. And you would know then, wouldn't you? And how many of us know what grants are available through the LEP? I know we've got the LEP coming at another meeting, but how many of us know what grants are available? And how many of us are talking to businesses, etc. Where is the information flow about grants for businesses? Yeah, I bet you can.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the update and the presentation. I just wanted to ask about the Better Skills and Jobs Fund. You mentioned 14 million. I just want to try and get a little bit more detail about what that's focusing on and any sort of any inequalities impact assessments that are doing around that as well.
So I've not got a breakdown here, but Vicky Harper, who runs that team for us, I can get to give you a breakdown of all the funding that's coming through there. So a lot of that is European funding, a majority of it's European funding, and the Works Better programme is the biggest part of that. But I can get Vicky to provide you a breakdown of everything in that.
I think I've had a separate briefing on that, so that's European Social Fund.
Yes, yeah.
Funding for looking at unemployment.
Yes,
trying to
upskill and upskill, yes, yeah.
And then what, because we've got, it was quite interesting just to read a couple of points. For example, Kirklees has the highest net flow of workers into the city region, so there's the issue within the skills base, or not necessarily skills base, but the right employment here for people to stay and work in Kirklees, and then there's the actual low skills, low wage economy as well here.
Yes.
And then obviously you've got pockets from different parts of the district as well, haven't you? So in my ward we've got parts that we've got very low skills with IMD level. So just wondering what kind of inequalities impact assessment you would do around something like around your sort of skills and jobs types, so to make sure that you're focusing on the right people. Because you wouldn't have that detail now.
I haven't got a detail.
Okay,
now,
fair.
I can get it from there, it's not a problem.
But that's something we would look at.
Yes, yeah. And again, I think that's part of the appraisal system, so we'd have to cover a lot of that stuff in our business case, is quite detailed. So.
Can I ask the heat network programme?
Yes.
Where are we with that?
So with
Business case, is it?
Yeah, with business case development, and we've put in a request to the Energy Accelerator Fund for some support and feasibility work to develop that business case for us.
Right, okay. So, this is a case in point, so the Huddersfield Heat Network Scheme. What would be the decision process for it?
I don't know.
It would
You
go,
know,
would go to the city region
Yes.
group.
Yeah. But where in Kirklees, what decision process does it have before it gets there?
Internally, right, okay. Right.
I guess Kevin.
Yeah.
It'll be through,
That's-
L&T.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But L&T,
Yeah, just for input in it, would have had a formal cabinet decision to go forward. To
No.
put the scheme in.
No.
It will have a formal cabinet decision, I believe, I'm still getting my head around how the system works. It's very different to where I've come from. A cabinet decision to accept the funding and to take the scheme forward if it's
Right.
successful.
so it would go for decision to release.
Yes, so the scheme will be submitted into the lab if it's successful and it comes back. to
And then if it
us,
comes
yes.
back, it comes back for decision.
Yeah.
So how do people input into that scheme before it goes for decision to the left?
I don't know, that's a really good question because at the moment I think it's just our team of officers. I we discussed it at the climate members.
Yes, we have.
I will discuss it down there.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll be a little.
But that's a working.
Yes, well, it's
It's-
yeah,
it's-
it's not really the same thing there.
It's nice to know, but
Yeah.
it's that's really
So that's case in point as to what the process is. Does it go up to the left for decision first, presumably, and then come back here to accept the funding?
Yes.
Or is there a process whereby our business case is accepted by decision-making process and then put up to the...
I'm going to end up putting John on the spot now, and I was just what's in the room. The heat network. The heat network project.
Oh, yes, yeah.
In terms of what we put forward to the city region for
Yeah.
the funding request, is there any opportunity when we're putting funding things in like that for people to be part of the process in terms of deciding what that scheme looks like before we go in? Has it been through any groups, discussion groups? So what cabinet-wise, we take a decision once with an approval, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose in terms of the form that the heat network takes.
Yeah, is that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's basically at the moment it's followed a sort of technical specification that we've basically said we want to explore the most economically viable way of establishing a heat network. I.e., it's going to be a commercially viable proposition for Huddersfield Town Centre. But I think, there's no reason why we shouldn't open it out a bit more for the next stage of work.
I think that's answered my question of what I was thinking. I don't think we stop down.
Yeah, so do you know what I mean? When you're doing it, does it go to more council plans?
I think really that fits into the point I was trying to make, working across the whole of the city region, isn't it? So how many other are we using this as a pilot project for the whole of the city region? So which other towns and cities would benefit from excess heat, we're using excess heat from whatever source that might be. So we're using it as a pilot project as the stuff that's happening elsewhere, and then looking, if it works in Huddersfield, we're then looking to replicate that across the 2.2, but so 300 people benefiting from it rather than 200,000 people benefiting from it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're not doing it in isolation rather than looking at it.
And that sort of thing, if you've got a region covering 2.5 million people, you think, actually, if it works here, you've got to be planning to do that everywhere in this future, things about energy production, energy distribution, all of that. So,
which we are talking
and if we've got mechanisms
about, but yeah.
So it's a good project for us, but it needs to be a good project for the whole city region, doesn't it?
All right. Any other points? No. So we do have the letter and the combined going to be invited for the meeting today. So we can, this was sort of an introductory, and then we can go into detail with them and things. Items that I've picked up then, climate emergency, the governance, how does this go through all decisions, major schemes, etc. Transparency in the appraisal process, but also transparency in how we share information as well. Figures for business growth, you said you provide. You also said you provide equalities, impact assessment information. Yes. Just a few things I picked up on. Or anything else? Anybody?
Sounds good to me.
Right, thank you very much. Can we move then on to domestic abuse strategy? That's item 8. So, this is yourself.
Thank you, yes. Thank you. So, thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to further update you on the work of the Council and partners in responding to domestic abuse. And with your permission, Councillor Snow, if I could just give a summary of the report, please.
Yeah, because last time we did it was all new members about the
I know, yes, I'm conscious of that.
All right.
Just for the benefit of the committee members, I'm sat with the Head of Service for Safeguarding and Equality now with Social Care. Alexia Gray is the Service Manager for Domestic Abuse, but Alexia has had a family emergency, so she's had to shoot off home just in the last half an hour. So I'm standing in, and hopefully I can give you the information that you require. So the input and engagement from this committee previously to this agenda has been invaluable. And following my update to you back in November, I'm pleased to be able to bring this paper to you today so that the views of the committee can continue to help inform the proposals of the renewed domestic abuse strategy that's heading to Cabinet. The impact of domestic abuse on people, families, children and communities is well documented. We know that. We know that our homes, our relationships, they should be a place of sanctuary, a place of refuge, a place of love. But tragically, there are some places in Kirklees where that's not the case, and those homes and relationships are places of fear, oppression and abuse. I've presented prevalence information to this committee previously, and we know from this that the incidents of domestic abuse in Kirklees, they continue to rise, and in fact that mirrors a national picture. And whilst the response to domestic abuse or the response of the partnership to domestic abuse in Kirklees is more joined up than it ever has been, the partnership has reflected on the need for a longer-term solution, and a solution which recognises and widens the response to a broader societal, economical and environmental impact of abuse. And much of that detail is in section 3 of the paper that's been provided to you today. The shift in focus from where we were previously is now beyond the person towards a whole community and whole societal response to this issue. And section 5.2 of the paper just provides a very high level vision statement which is for everyone to recognise, or for everyone, including people, partners and places, to recognise their responsibilities in tackling domestic abuse. The Domestic Abuse Strategic Partnership have identified 4 strategic priority areas, and they're listed in section 5.3 of the report. There are detailed action plans that sit behind each of those priority areas. And a key point to note for the discussion today is the shared objective to strengthen the preventative offer through acting before someone harms or is harmed. And I'd like to be able to talk to you about some of the detail that sits behind that. This provides an opportunity for the Council and partners to work proactively with schools, work with businesses, work with communities, to raise awareness and help build community capacity that is much needed to respond effectively to this issue. The vision and strategy received formal sign-off at the Communities Board on the 10th of May, and that's covered under section 7 of the report. And that was following a range of consultation with partners, with a number of teams, a number of agencies and boards. Section 7 equally highlights some of the next steps that are being taken with a view to a formal launch of the strategy on the 30th of September. We know when I've been here previously, I've talked to you about some of the risk management arrangements within domestic abuse in Kirklees, for instance the multi-agency risk assessment conference. And we know from this that there's no one single agency, no one single person that has the complete picture when it comes to abuse. So the approach that's presented within the strategy today and within this paper is pretty much broadening that so that there's a recognition of the whole community, a whole societal response to domestic abuse, The additionality of funding to respond to this agenda, which is highlighted in the report also, I think that's a huge sign of leadership from this council. And I'd be happy to talk to you about how, or some of the early conversations and how that's been apportioned so that we can get the best value in Kirklees. And just finally to say that I recognise this is an ambitious, but I believe an achievable vision and an achievable strategy. It echoes the principles of what we talk about, people, partners and place, and more than happy to take any questions from the committee on the detail that sits behind it.
So you mentioned about the strategy, the partnerships, etc. Who wants to go into a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know about anybody else, but I've got a written how next to that in the strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah, so
Say how.
admittedly, yes, the strategy is deliberately written so that it's high level. It echoes some of the sort of high level priorities. So I did say the detail sits behind the action plan. Just to give you some examples of some of the detail that sits behind each of those strategic priority areas. I know that this committee or previous members of this committee have been very sort of keen to understand how we're working with communities, how we're working with businesses. So as part of our work in sort of understanding or working towards acting before someone harms or is harmed, continuing to raise awareness of domestic abuse, continuing to look at public awareness and information campaigns, looking at how we influence and change norms and attitudes within communities and groups. So there's a range of campaigns that we will be building on that have been led out successfully in Kirklees. I talked previously about the work with schools in relation to Operation Encompass. So now we have almost several hundred schools that are now signed up to that, so receiving domestic abuse notifications. Looking to scale that out now so that it covers further education establishments. And again, that's really strengthening the approach that we have around prevention. Looking to increase the confidence that communities have to respond to this issue or to sort of pick up on some of the signs. And we're looking to do that through some dedicated learning, dedicated community development, strengthening the interfaces with community hubs, community plus services, strengthening the approach that we have around what I brought here previously, which is the MARAC and the DRAM. And they've received in excess of 3,000 cases that have been safeguarded since the inception of those arrangements, looking at some of the high-risk victims. Much of the work, though, I think what I would echo is that it's about shifting the onus from the victim more towards what the sort of ethos and onus is on the perpetrator, on families, and also on communities. So there's quite a bit of detail that sits in the action plan. I'd be happy to share that once the action plan has been endorsed by the partnership group that governs the action plan. It's going to be Domestic Abuse Strategic Partnership in 2 weeks, I believe. So once partners have had the opportunity to align their responsibilities towards the action plan and identify with the work that they're doing, I'd be more than happy to bring that back here or share that with the committee members.
Okay.
So 400k budget for domestic abuse, handling that for the place-based leads. We're going to be responsible for that funding. Not quite ready yet in terms of being able to get it allocated and out the door. Could be quite a short period to actually allocate that funding and to ensure that it's actually used to best effect. Are you going to be providing advice and support to place-based leads in terms of what they might invest in, and also where's the flexibility lie for innovation to actually make sure that people who are place-based leads can actually come up with some different approaches within their patches?
Absolutely, yes. Councillor, thank you for that. So in terms of the additionality of funding, there are 3 key areas that have been identified in how that additional funding will be spent. Firstly, and most importantly, is to sustain some of the critical services that have been at risk. So primarily the IFA services we call it, or the independent domestic violence advocates, and they work primarily within hospitals, within schools to support victims navigating through the system. We're also looking at a dedicated learning and development offer. So that's in response to what you've described there, Councillor, in relation to leading on elected member training, place-based leads training, working with perpetrators and shifting some of their kind of behaviours and norms, and then sharing local and national learning that comes out of things like serious case reviews, domestic homicide reviews. And much of the place-based work, which is the ethos of the new approach, will be within the community development work that's been identified. That's the third strand of the additionality of funding. So we're looking to strengthen those interfaces with community hubs, networks that are already in place, talk to some of those place-based needs and groups, identify what's working well in other areas, and look to scale out some of that good stuff that's working well, and strengthen the support that's available, so strengthen the advice, the support and learning that's available across the country.
So if it works well, if there's learning that comes from it, then you would think it would be something that you want to mainstream. So is there some mechanism, some way that you might look at that to think that you want to mainstream the things that we've learned from this process?
Yes, so in the action plan there's a number of proposals to hold shared learning events, for example, and engage sort of community groups, community members, elected members in some of those conversations. I'm conscious that the funding only goes so far. It's a 3-year strategy, so the funding that we've identified takes us to 3 years. In terms of sustaining things beyond that, I'm building on the things that the strategy hopefully will achieve well. I think there's some strategic discussions that need to be had, particularly with partners, around their contribution to this agenda. So whilst the Council has identified a response in terms of responding to the mental health issues that are prevalent in Kirklees and domestic abuse being one of the key sort of triggers to that, I think there are some conversations that need to be had with our CCG partners to just sort of understand what can they bring to the table also. This is a fundamental issue.
Can we just clarify, what percentage of the funding are you saying is going to support existing services, and what percentage is transformation?
So I've got some draft numbers here. I don't exactly know how that's apportioned, Chair, and I can get that to you. But in terms of the information that I brought here previously, because we talked about the MAP arrangements of the DRAM, and for that to have a dedicated coordinator post. So almost 10% is going into funding dedicated arrangements to keep those high-risk arrangements going. And then in terms of sustaining some of the other services, I would say probably just looking at the high level and eyeballing it, probably about a third, just shy of a third is going into sustaining some of the critical services.
And when you say about place-based leads, can you be a bit more specific?
Yes, I'm conscious that this is an emerging area, and I know that Council is really keen on, is really keen on embedding these arrangements. I don't have the detail exactly as to who they are, but I know that if Alexia was here, she would have the sort of technical detail that sits behind that. I think much of it is initially strengthening the relationships with
officers or councillors.
I think there's a mixture of both.
A mixture of
both, yes. Apologies, yes, should have been clearer.
No.
I think initially it's about looking at what, or mapping what there already is out there within communities, and then sort of really getting the best out of those resources and getting the best return on investment from those resources, as opposed to trying to do something entirely new.
Well, I was going to say a council project, not a council project, unless there's some mapping done first.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I'm probably going to ask some stuff that's already been covered before, just because I know you've done. But I am really happy to see the wider approach that's been taken in terms of community and society. I think that's really important. And just on the MARIC stuff that you mentioned, actually we had a conference recently with local head teachers, and they mentioned the multi-agency approach and how well that is going in terms of them being able to pick up, children who might be affected with the domestic abuse situation in their home, and how that's been the information has been shared and how to look after the children. So that's a really good thing to see. Just wanted to ask a couple of things in terms of how you're working perhaps with some local community groups and advocacy groups in the area. And I think you've touched on that a little bit, but it's just making sure that we're not duplicating anything. I did meet with a group recently called Women's Lives Matter, which you're probably aware of, and have raised some. I don't think they were aware of the 400k, which was interesting. So it's just
I don't know how that information's been dispersed.
Okay.
And then also just about one of their key aspects around supported accommodation, so how, women who are fleeing, and I know that's, we're looking at the short term, the longer term stuff is really important, but how do we ensure that there is the right accommodation available for them locally as possible as well?
Sure. Okay, so in terms of the work with agencies on the ground, some of the advocacy groups, we have a partnership with a third sector organisation, Penang Domestic Violence Group, and they essentially hold a contract for some of the domestic abuse services in Kirklees. They are very much in touch with groups on the ground. They provide a whole range of services spanning through the sort of prevention through to accommodation-based support, feedback from understanding the stories and the outcomes from victims and families who were affected is routinely positive, so I'm quite confident about that. They also work quite closely with services like Women's Aid, Carmen Ivana, a whole range of services, so that we're capturing a range of insights. We're looking at, it's generally a gender issue, but we're looking at it from a wide scope, looking at things like LGBTQ, etc., etc. The point about accommodation, that's a real pressure point. It has been nationally. It continues to be for Kirklees. The government recently launched some additional funding rounds for specifically for accommodation-based services, mainly where children are involved. And I know from some of the stuff that I've seen and when I've been out that children are probably more than 50% of people who live in those services or in those accommodation-based services are children. So Kirklees, along with partners in the region, Leeds, Wakefield, have been successful in that funding round. So there's some work that's being done in response to that. There's a detailed plan that sits behind how that money will be used and where some of that need is, and identifying where some of those refuge offers might be. So I'm happy to share any detail that comes out of that with yourself. I don't have it here in front of me, but I know that that's a nationally recognised issue, and that's why the government's been pushing out some additional funding on that.
Yeah, I do agree. It's an issue. Do you have any timelines around that?
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. Whilst I haven't got it with me here, I will share that with the committee.
Do we have enough accommodation, do you think, for your strategy?
I think, if you recall, Councillor, when I came previously, I sort of showed you this this visual, which was almost like a risk mapping, and accommodation, I think, is one of those areas that's regularly at high risk.
Yeah, because one of your things is saying people who are experiencing abuse can retain or access safe and suitable accommodation, so we need the accommodation.
Absolutely. I think the opportunity with this is that if we get there at the earliest stage through some of the preventative work, then it will negate the crisis response that comes with fleeing domestic abuse. But that is a valid point in that there needs to be suitable, effective accommodation when victims flee.
Yeah, it might be useful to do that amongst some of the other accommodation things we're looking at in terms of vulnerable members of our community. It's done at the same time. Might be opportunity to increase capacity as we're doing in other areas, so that's sort of the efficient use of time. Yeah, thank you. I see there's a couple of bits that are hopefully going to come into the strategy. I wasn't able to prevalence information, but I think so in terms of scrutinising the effectiveness of the strategy, we used to see some longitudinal data on prevalence against historic levels. Really long-term stuff. I know when the financial crisis kicked in 11 years ago, there was some really good mapping of concerns about increases in domestic abuse in those sorts of contexts, which had happened previously. But also, again, actually looking at some of the stuff that had been done in the past to reduce levels of domestic abuse, so it didn't return to historic levels. So it would be really, one incident too many, but we need to be aware of it. And I think particularly in terms of absolute things and also repeat incidents. So doing that, some of the work you're doing with perpetrators, we should be able to see the effectiveness of that in terms of reduction in repeat incidents. In terms of the preventative stuff, we should be able to see reduction in absolute over time or a long-term strategy. I think we all need to know where it's been. Historic levels have been very, very high. I'm not sure we're back up to those levels. So, I think the other thing about the preventative stuff and the school stuff, it's great that you're doing, talking to people about giving the churches to sex and relationship education against this holistic approach, isn't it? So, personally, I think, as part of relationship education, we ought to be talking to young people how they relate to each other. And you were talking about homes, happy relationships, happy productive relationships. And if we can do that as part of what we do anyway, then that should reduce the incidence of domestic abuse, and we should see long-term impacts of that. You talk about a long-term strategy there as well. There's all sorts of positives there about seeing abuse, but also about before we look at the impact of domestic abuse on children in abusive households and their mental health, again, that looking at what a healthy family should look like or feel like would be just making those links, isn't it?
No, indeed it is.
Job use of resources.
Yeah, you were looking puzzled, I think, about prevalence.
No, I wasn't.
Appendix 2's completely blank.
No, Chair. I was trying to find my document which has all the prevalence in
That's all right.
front of me.
It's
So
just that your
the
prevalence
reason why-
information is completely blank in your
I
strategy.
was panicking because I was just thinking, I'm sure it's in here somewhere.
No.
I'm going to embarrass you, but
No,
I couldn't
it's
find it.
completely
So
blank.
you know when
You're
you've got the paper, you
Yeah.
just can't get your hands
I
to it.
know.
That's what I was frantically trying to do because I know it's there and it absolutely
I
will.
don't know at the moment, but what I did find useful, and we were looking at stuff back to at least back to 1992, when there were similar financial problems, but not as extreme as they were in 2008, and there was that relationship between
Absolutely.
economic pressures
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
domestic abuse.
Austerity has had an impact. You're raising really valid
But
points.
it's useful for us when we're making decisions at Scrutiny to look at what's happened in the past and what's been effective in the trends.
So if I may just give a bit of context on the issues that Councillor has raised. So on prevalence info, finally I found it. So it's there. There's a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What we know is that nationally the Office of National Statistics continues to show a growth rate in relation to domestic abuse incidents year on year. So I think last year was a growth rate of 18% without looking in detail. What we also know is that on average a victim experiences domestic abuse 35 times before they actually call it out, before they actually make a call. So we know that it's fundamentally underreported. And we know that that's the case in some of the rural areas in Kirklees as well, because when you look at the demographic and you look at some of the numbers, there are some key pressure points. So there are a few of the areas that we're continuing to look at in terms of what would be the litmus test for the strategy. I think we can apply a sort of 0 or 1, we can say it's going to reduce the numbers. But it's sort of thinking about all of those things that we know about. It's underreported, a number of sort of incidents that occur. Whilst it may not reduce, is what I'm saying, just trying to balance some of the expectations. I suppose I think it will be the outcomes that will be fundamentally important towards. The bit about relationship education, absolutely, you hit on an important question there. You'll be aware of the draft domestic abuse bill. That was published earlier this year by the government and the Joint Committee. Scrutiny report that was published in June, and to which the government set out a range of commitments, and within that the expectation and sort of statutory nature of positive relationships, health education, sex education in schools was key for planned, and that's well within the action plan within the strategy.
Harpreet actually touched on some of the creative stuff that I was actually thinking of. But in terms of your work with the communities, I'd like to see some specific work with men before they become perpetrators. In terms of your preventative work, we need to do some targeted work in certain communities. And also in terms of your attitude to change, how you're measuring that. You mentioned like confidence building and reporting. That they are soft outcomes. So how is it that you're planning on measuring them?
So the measurability aspect, completely take that on board, Councillor. I think it's one of those areas that nationally has been quite tricky to measure the impact and hence why the point about longitudinal study is always really important. So I think that's something that I can take back and talk to Alexia and the services about what are we doing in response to this.
Particularly when we're talking about low budgets or cuts and services, on shoestring basically, but how are we ensuring that we're getting maximum impact from what we've already got, rather than sort of continuing to go and meet some of these communities and to some extent sort of wasting time. And we come to the end of the 3 years and we're sort of going back and thinking, well, actually we've not been able to deliver because of X, Y and Z, but what are we actually doing to ensure that we are getting maximum impact from the limited funds that we have?
Yeah, previously when I've been here, I've been quite transparent with the committee that in the previous strategy there was a sort of outcome to look at and strengthen our approach to data and intelligence, and we've not made the progress that we had. But I know I'm confident that this time regionally and nationally there's a significant amount of progress already being made. So Council is working with colleagues in Leeds and Wakefield to set out what we're calling a dashboard report, essentially that covers a number of sort of prevalence, outcome-based indicators around domestic abuse. So hopefully that will give us some of the measurability aspect. The point that you made about working with men, indeed, I think there's a whole sort of action that's set out in terms of working with perpetrators, identifying the motivating factors that might cause one to abuse, and that's not always men. It can also be, absolutely don't need to genderify. Absolutely, it can be women. And in fact, we've had domestic homicide review in Kirklees recently where the perpetrator was a woman. But I think essentially it's looking at how do we understand some of those factors that cause someone to apply coercion or control, or cause someone to enact this quite abhorrent crime, and working with them at the earliest stage. So one example is the conversations we're having with the Police Crime Commissioner in looking at perpetrator programs and sort of sustaining and rolling that out across the police. So that's a key part of the action plan also.
Can I just ask about your governance on page 15? Do you not find that a bit complicated?
Yeah, governance maps it is because of the cross-cutting nature of domestic abuse. I mean, if it's complicated for the committee, then I think that's a takeaway point for me.
Because if it's a complicated, how are people not going to drop through this complicated system? Do you know what I mean?
I see. Okay.
If this is a complex, I know it's working with partners and different areas, but this is a complex governance structure here.
Sure.
And we're talking about very real sovereignty people, and how is this the complicated governance going to help people, or is things just going to get tied up in the complicated governance? Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. I think in terms of the operational structures that sit within this sort of strategic governance structure, so how do we respond to this? How do we respond when a disclosure is made, etc.? I think I would say I'm relatively assured that that's with this strategy and with the additionality of resources that will be strengthened. So I gave 2 examples earlier about MARA and the daily risk assessment management meeting. I think they're both still quite embryonic. They're still finding their way. And I know that partners have said that they can find it quite resource intensive, but we're working with a whole range of partners in terms of that operational response. This strategic governance map, I think you're right, there's a number of arrows that are going in a number of directions. Yeah.
That's not to say it's a bad thing.
Indeed, yeah. I think it's trying to reflect that it's an issue that cuts across a whole range of areas, and that's why a number of constructs or a number of governance arrangements have got an opportunity to play their part. So, for instance, it sits well within the communities board oversight. But equally, the safeguarding boards have got key roles to play in this, as has the health and wellbeing board in terms of the impact on mental health. So I'll take this back and talk to our colleagues about are there ways in which we can represent this easier? Do we need to represent all the detail that sits here? And to sort of simplifying the approach.
Any other points? No? Okay, so the action plans to come. And you're going to put outcomes expected and the measurability of outcomes. Yes. Accommodation, look strategically as part of the overall accommodation needs. Make sure that you have the accommodation that you need for your strategy. The prevalence information you're going to let us have.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
And the complex governance will have a look at. Is there anything else that we no? Okay. Alright. Thank you very much. Thank you. Alright then, Kirklees climate emergency then. Just pause a minute while we
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Maybe you want to stop at home?
I'll move down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
you're
quite
right.
great. And then specifically this one.
Scrutinise us. Very interesting. Just a non-sage thing. Just non-sagely, or you take it away.
Okay, so if we have any councillors who are on the scrutiny panel who are on the climate emergency working group, can you just indicate that so that we know? Thank you. And we'll put it down. Alright, okay. So, yeah. Okay. Alright, so this paper details the work of the climate emergency working group. Alison Camille's and Megan and John are here to speak to this as well. Who's going to lead on it? Alright, bear in mind that we will have read the report.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so as the chair said, I'm assuming you read the report. So basically, what I'm going to try and do here briefly is to explore and kind of flag up some of the issues which I assume from the scrutiny point of view we wanted to think about. I think the first thing that we have to say is that this is an inherently difficult task. Because basically what it actually involves, and it became immediately obvious to all of us, if it wasn't before, this involves looking at absolutely all areas of the council's work. And in that sense, it's a bit analogous really with it's a bit of a microcosm with society as a whole actually, in one way, because of course the climate emergency affects all aspects of society. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the methodology that we chose to adopt to tackle this inherently difficult task. That's been operating on several different levels. Okay, so the first level that we adopted was that we chose to take a themed approach, where what we did was we're looking in the work like we've got I'm not probably big European Andrew, but we're lucky that we've got people like Andrew, obviously on the working party as well, with a lot of expertise in this area, and of course we've got John, who's given us a lot of steer, but also I think we can apply some common sense issues. So what we've been doing is we prioritised and identified certain priority areas, and basically we've been having more in-depth themed discussions and investigations of them. So what are these areas? So it's planning policy, waste, the Huddersfield Heat Network, which I heard mentioned earlier, school meals and catering, Kirklees economic strategy, business engagement and support, the White Rose Forest, tree planting, lighting, in a nutshell, green spaces, flood risk and surface water drainage, and coming up we've got travel and transport, buildings and energy efficiency and renewables. So these are the, if you like, more detailed themed approaches that we've been taking. However, that isn't enough, because, as I said earlier, this covers the full range of human activities, and not just within the council, but within society. So we also adopted a policy of having standing items of concern, such as communications with the public, and crucially target setting, and I'm going to come back to that later. So we therefore decided that what we needed to do as a methodology was move beyond these identified, if you like, obvious areas, and think about how we're going to mobilise and engage with the whole council. And so there's two aspects I want to flag up. The first thing, which is mentioned on point 2.5 of the report, which refers to a dynamic audit process that we are carrying forward. And just to highlight a few issues about the methodology and direction of travel of that audit, it's certainly as a chair, and I think this is true of all the members of the committee, we want action, and that's our focus. Okay, and basically, so if you look at the format that we're identified here for this audit, it's been very much about, yes, identifying the previous good work, and I have to make this point, there's been a lot of good work actually undertaken previously by officers in the council, and it's come out in the work of the working party. It's been pretty impressive in many ways, but obviously that's not enough, because this is an emergency and we need to do more. So we've set ourselves a series of questions here, and which I won't bother reading out because you can read yourselves. And basically, as you'll see, these are very much about establishing what we've done so far, and certainly, I think quite interestingly, looking at immediate actions, but also looking at I think, John, you call them moonshot opportunities, all right? So, which are the more ambitious kind of long-term actions that we, as a council, would need to look at. Now, I would have to make the point that, given the scale of this challenge, then I suspect that those moonshot opportunities will be today's moonshot opportunities will become tomorrow's common sense, I would have thought, if not perhaps not even enough. Anyway, so okay, so I'm sure you'll have noticed from the methodology, but well, I hope you've noticed that it was deliberately constructed in a way that we are gathering our data so that it will be rolled out in the most expeditious manner to produce the final report. And I don't expect that it's clear from the questions that we're asking. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the issues that have arisen in this process. One of the first issues was about staffing constraints, because basically, obviously, since 2010, I don't know the full history, but I understand going back in the good old days, it was actually an environment unit with over 25 staff employed. 50. The 20s employed before 2010. And anyway, basically, we've obviously had certain staffing issues. So the first issue we had to deal with really was, because there's no discrete council department that's dealing with the environment, which is at this point, and that may be something that people will want to look at in the future. But basically, that then we have to identify suitable staff. And I have to say, John has risen, who I think we're probably the last man standing on one of them, of the old environmental unit, and John has risen magnificently to the challenge and really played an excellent role, along with all the other officers, actually, I have to say. So we got our staffing in place, and I think just to discuss one source of tension, because that is built into the remit of the working party that was agreed by the motion, because it has 2.4 states. The motion that set up the working party stated that, well, its job is to produce a report, it's not a decision-making body. And certainly this has been a problem, hasn't it? Because as this process has continued, I mean, firstly, this is an emergency. It's urgent. And as we've gone forward, it's become obvious that certain issues have and opportunities have come up, and members of the committee have flagged, quite rightly, flagged these up as we've gone along. And I'm pleased to say that obviously, look, this isn't a French Revolutionary style committee of public safety, where we can, take an executive fiat and start making decisions. So it's a policy making body. So it's not a policy making body, but it's to do proposals. Exactly so. So it's to produce recommendations. So having said that, though, that some of the ideas that have floated have actually already been taken up by the Cabinet and so on. So, for example, and we've started looking at developing them as we go along. So, for example, you might have seen the announcements, the announcements that were made at the Council and the press release. We're looking at developing a Kirklees Climate Commission, looking at developing ideas around the Kirklees Green Charter, accelerated tree planting, accelerated work on electric vehicles and so on. So in that sense, although that tension is always going to be there, if we read it at the committee, I think some interim measures were taken, and it does flag up, I think, quite an important issue, which is worth emphasising. I think I don't know whether my colleagues on the committee would agree, but what's come up clear to me through the work is that actually a crucial aspect of whatever goes to council in the end, in the final report, is about establishing strategic leadership. It's about establishing structures. It's about establishing a strategic way of working that will not only push through change in the longer term, but also through wider, encourage change through wider society. So finally, just to highlight the issue I mentioned earlier, which is the issue of target setting. Now, this is a very difficult issue. It's an inherently difficult issue for all sorts of ways, and I won't go into a big methodological discussion of the problems inherent in measuring kind of climate change and how to answer it. I mean, just to mention two issues. Obviously, there's many unknowns, because this is a very developing site area, and actually the data is constantly shifting. And just to say to put it bluntly, all the evidence is that we've underestimated the effect of climate change on the planet and in terms of species extinction. So this is something we really have to get right, and it's crucial as well from a scrutiny point of view, because in 5 years' time, hopefully, this scrutiny committee will be looking at, or even sooner perhaps, we'll be looking at how far these measures have been successful. So it's about accountability, it's about measuring what is actually effective. So we have to get it right. And now again, final decisions haven't been taken, but in terms of the kind of what seems to be emerging as the target here, and certainly we kind of it's covered at a regional level, is zero carbon from 1990 baseline by 2038. So this is in line with regional kind of work and Tyndall Centre. On your papers, you've got a copy of the flowchart, there you go.
No.
You have?
No.
No, you haven't. I'm sorry.
No.
Right. Well, I've definitely recommend. John can say more about it, and no doubt you might be willing to provide that. It's an excellent piece of work that he's done about it. But that basically sets out various kind of approaches that can be taken, and the first approach. I'll shut up in a moment and let John, if you've got any questions.
Well, I think we've got some questions.
Yeah. So just to finish by saying this, okay, if we're going to achieve our targets, this is going to be a very difficult, challenging process to achieve. And if it's going to work, it's going to require, I would suggest, and perhaps we do certain things, it's going to require a steady persistence, it's going to require honesty and self-criticism as we go forward, because improvement and self-improvement has got to be an enable game. As I said earlier, it's going to take a strategic approach, and it's going to require mobilisation of the whole community and partners. Now, the Working Party has been tasked with producing an action programme, which we're in a good position to do, as I've explained why, okay? But that is only a snapshot. This is a process, this is not an event. And obviously, again, that presumably it's up to the members of the Working Party to make sure those basic truths are built into the final report.
Right then, I'm opening up to questions. I have a question myself. There are no timescales for the work of the Working Party in this report, apart from one, which is to have an action plan to the Council within 6 months. And there was no update within 6 months or anything, and absolutely no timescales, no draft action plan, nothing in this report. So, what are your timescales for actually producing some output from the working group?
Yeah, so the report will go back to full council on the 8th of October.
It's up about the next step sometime now.
Yeah, but where's your action plan? It says continue the progress as well and report back with detailed proposals. So where's your draft action plan? Where's your timescales for getting there? Where?
Well, there is not a draft action plan at present. That's what's being.
Is that the problem? Why you go back in 6 months? Is that why? All right. Because in terms of reference for your working group was to report to council within 6 months. So, and that was at the January council. So, I would have expected sort of a draft, at least, working plan at this point in time.
Can I come in? I think Helen was going to say we may have passed the motion in January. It took time to organise and arrange all the dates. So we're counting 6 months from our date of our first meeting. And then it's getting it scheduled in the council business. So we may have wanted to bring it earlier or later. It's just when there's space to bring it to council. So we're very much aware of the 6 months remit, but the remit started the day we had our first meeting.
So where's your draft action plan and the timescales to put that together?
We have, basically, what we've been doing is we set out a series of a timetable of the meetings, and basically that is the action. That's the plan we've been working to in terms of the final production of the report. I don't actually have it to hand, I'm afraid, but
I think the committee has it. Can I see it? Yes.
That's just that.
So we have our work programme through which every meeting is scheduled what we're looking at the range of services across the council and what we need to produce in terms of the audit. And then the last 2 meetings are going to be very much about pulling it together, ready to bring to council.
Probably another finding as well that these are the areas that have been identified as core areas to present an update to the Working Party. But effectively, all of the services in the council are in the process of being consulted to gather information in a similar fashion that will inform the action plan. That isn't complete yet. That's still the way.
Because there's nothing on that in your report. Is there the timescales for that?
No.
Not there. I think you'll find that. I think when you get used to me, you'll find that I like timescales and milestones.
And it's good. We should append it. We should at the earliest possible stage. We should append this. I didn't realise you didn't get it.
So go on then. So what you do? So what you do when? So you're asking all the council services for their information.
That's right.
Are you asking So you're asking to identify existing initiatives and new initiatives that they're undertaking?
Yeah. So basically asking what they're doing at the moment. Are there any opportunities for what they're doing at the moment? Any sort of regulation drivers for doing that kind of thing? Then we're asking them for opportunities within their current resourcing envelope. So basically saying, is there anything that we could be doing better to help address the climate change emergency? Then we're also asking for sort of bigger ideas up to the sort of scale of moonshots where we don't have resources attached or anything like that, but where service areas feel like there might be a good opportunity that perhaps we're not taking advantage of. Then once that gets pulled into the action plan down the line, there'll be a process of sort of ranking them based on current funding, risk, deliverability, that kind of thing, and then their impact in terms of how much carbon, what's the bang for buck.
Alright, so it's ask for information up to the working group. Just so I understand this, it is not a set a strategy here and then strategically across all the services how they can contribute to that strategy in what they're doing, so that it's not individual services that are doing things, it is a full council strategic approach. That's not, is that where you're going with it?
Well, it's both, isn't it? Because, I mean, basically, what the whole strategy does will be the sum of its parts. So, that you know, in terms of you've got your individual departments and sections, and I should have added actually in my introduction, but we also have, through the working party, have launched a staff engagement process where we're asking individual staff and giving individual staff an opportunity to also contribute to this process and come up with ideas and suggestions. And so it's a case then of, and that's what I mean about, that's what I was trying to say earlier about the complexity of the process, is to bring it together where we have, yes, actions within individual sections and departments, but knit it together within a strategic framework. But it's hopefully robust enough that will allow us to actually take us forward over a whole period of time, and that goes back to our kind of the importance of target setting and actually measuring outcomes, which again will be part of the whole process.
Yeah, thanks for the report so far. Just looking at the information we've got in the report, and starting from paragraph 2.3, a couple of statistics in there. A target for council to achieve 40% reduction in carbon emissions by 2021, from a baseline of 20.56. Councils at 32%, that's of 2017-18, district 35%. It will be interesting to know, actually to look at mapping that over time to see what the reduction is, what's led to that reduction already. This is quite close to meeting the 40% target, even given it's like a slow down. I think looking at that statistic might be struggling to meet the 2038 figure of zero. So my personal feeling is that probably a lot has to do with War Zone Plus, which must have had a massive impact on the carbon emissions across the district. I noticed there's only national, it's still not happening national, and that's 10 years. So that'd be interesting. So actually looking at it. I find what you're saying about the robust process. One of the things we used to do, or tried to do, was carbon budgeting every year. So departments looking at that. That's a return to that. I think it's going to be messy, but actually
I can talk a little bit about what we're doing on carbon budgeting. That's helpful.
Yeah, because again, there's a crisis, but what we need to be looking at is what carbon does the council produce? You know, what's the net carbon impact of activity?
Yeah.
That is wider than, you know, it's not just the fuel that the big lorries are using, it's the fuel that staff use to get to work, it's the disposal of, looking at a holistic approach, the lighting the buildings, the heating the buildings, or sort of other activity like that. So there must be, you know, and it's going to be rough and ready, but I mean, you know, Friends of the Earth have got, you know, a rough and ready carbon calculator and some space like this, she's better than no calculation.
That one has got smart meters put in, it's the one buildings have got getting outputs and things like that.
Well, every building had a...
Yeah.
But it's a more holistic approach. It's all right.
Would it be helpful if we haven't particularly talked about the carbon budget at the moment? I can explain a bit about how that relates to those figures that you picked up.
I mean, your committee's doing that, or we're doing scrutinising the work.
Yes.
So actually to know what carbon is it, what the source of the carbon we wanted to reduce over the next 19 years, or where have we already reduced carbon, what carbon are we going to reduce over the next 90 years.
Yes.
So we've got a framework for the environmental audits. We need some figures that are going to give us to do that. I think in terms of helping our residents to better reduce their carbon impact, what do you do? And you focus on, the fact we can't get any further pots and crisp packets and put the wrong thing on our green things. It's like one of the lessons some of us learned earlier on. You don't sort of drive to the nearest recycling centre to take two bottles of wine because that's totally carbon inefficient. But we don't know that. So again, having a clear impact, again, fuel. I think the biggest probably reduction of people's carbon impact is with the reduction in use of fuels. Are we promoting more efficient boilers? A new housing scheme? Are we promoting district heating? Again, and actually, the council's got evidence of that. There's a massive fuss about the gas bill when we weren't billing people in our high rises properly on district heating, and the moaning about it going up from going up 90 quid a year to 180 quid a year. I'm thinking, I wish my fuel bill was only 180 quid a year, and we got low fuel. We have got very low fuel use for our property. So it's using that.
Yes.
Yeah, all that sort of thing. So I appreciate what Richard's saying about having all those orders, but some things, and again, that long list of stuff that we know we can be doing. White Rose Forest. I mean, when the Coe Valley Area Committee was working in partnership with Yorkshire Water and Coe Valley Tree Society, and we've got a tree audit, and the first thing that White Rose Forest said was there's more trees in Kirklees than we thought. But then that's not actually this latest research a couple of weeks ago about a trillion trees planted across the world is going to have a massive impact. And what is our contribution to that? So that list that some figures in it, that list of stuff that Richard talked about would be really useful in that report. But then
if I respond, perhaps first, the figures that are given at 2.3, that's kind of our current carbon emission reduction target. So that effectively that will run through to 2021. So as part of the climate emergency, we're looking at targets through to, in the longer term, through to sort of 2050 and beyond. It's probably worth noting as well that within the sort of the remit of the climate emergency decided early on, we needed to pursue a district-wide approach as opposed to just a council approach. That said, we'll continue to track our own carbon emissions where we have primary data to do so. So those figures for the council there, that derives from our council energy usage. So that's reliable primary data. The data we have for the district is based on the government data sets. I'm told, sort of internationally speaking, we're very fortunate in the UK to have this data set from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. That enables us to start looking and creating some carbon pathways for the future for Kirklees. In terms of sort of where we start from, we have a draft carbon budget that's been produced by the Tyndall Centre. So they're the national experts on carbon.
So doing that for Kirklees.
So we did one for Greater Manchester, and we've done one for the Leeds City region, and they're in the process of rolling out the tool for local authority level, replicating the methodology. But let's have a go. So we've got our draft figure. So that's where the 20 I don't think that's going to change.
Are you doing so?
Yes, yeah. But
that's good.
if you're interested, when that becomes live, we can circulate that link.
The methodology,
So what that means, and that's helped us then to develop the early stage of developing our proposal for a science-based target. What that means in the big picture is that what do we need to align with to ensure Kirklees is in line with what's in the Paris Agreement? And then in turn, the government's net zero by 2050, and then in turn, leads to regions target by 2038, our own target by 2038. So then the final step, and again we haven't done this yet, but will be to start by pathways. I mean, we'll need to start looking at where we've got our projects in Kirklees, our interventions, our things that we can do to reduce carbon. So you might think something like another warm zone, something like that, that kind of thing. Any interventions that we could do, we can start modelling that and trying to attribute a cost to that in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. And that's then, you can start then weighing them up in terms of what will have the biggest impact. So that's where we want to be, or we want to be as much as we can. Again, I'll emphasise that it is a process, so it depends on having the data to hand that enable us to sort of hang our hats on that. But we do in terms of the council's emissions data. That is our own data. It's easy. So, for example, we know that, say, for the council, if we develop the Huddersfield Heat Network as is currently envisaged, that will reduce corporate landlord emissions for the council by about 25%. So it's quite significant over business as usual, which is there.
So the data is useful in the absolute figures as well as the percentage changes as well.
Yeah.
So
So we can, I mean that's we can certainly bring that kind of detail.
Because he quoted the 700-ton reduction in carbon emissions over whatever period.
Yes, in terms of reference for what that figure means.
Because again, I know our solar panels have reduced carbon output by about 19 tonnes in the last whatever years. So no average.
I think just one final point to make in terms of the amount of carbon that we're talking about here. There's also, it's not entirely dependent on actions that the local authority will take locally or the people in Kirklees will take, because we'll also experience decarbonisation of the national grid for electricity. We'll also start seeing potential decarbonisation of natural gas by adding in things like biogas, or potentially switching over to hydrogen, which is certainly one of the more moonshot ends of the spectrum, but it is at the point of burning hydrogen, it's free of emissions. So there's sort of big picture schemes that might happen, and if they do, that could have a significant impact from external reasons.
I just wanted to say that we've got to keep it in perspective that we only started the work of this working group in March. So whilst we're in the process of gathering the data, we are hoping to do better than what we think we should be. We are hoping in partnership to be able to deliver, and looking ahead, Andrew, we're looking towards technology being able to get us there. But in the meantime, whilst we're looking inwards, we're also looking outwards to our partners. And it won't just be us, it won't just be the region, it'll be the national and global picture that we've got to align our initiatives with. So the reason why you haven't had the fullest of information is we're talking about something that's met, a group that's met 4 times.
I think where I'm coming from as well is that you're spending time looking at the base, but where is the strategic opportunities that you're actually going to propose? Because solar panels, we've been doing that for quite a long time.
But we're not saying we're doing that now.
We're not doing it now. No, but we've done it now. And the forestry stuff, well, that was a whole range of outcomes for the forestry stuff, wasn't it? So where are you going beyond that?
I totally agree, because I think the point's been made that in terms of looking at the council only, then that's perhaps relatively more straightforward than actually looking at household society industry jobs, but certainly across the whole of Kirklees and society generally. But in terms of to answer your question, in terms of strategic, so the levers of developing strategic change, obviously you've got to have internal processes which will, you know, we haven't really discussed fully yet. But we've been looking at ideas around, you know, this I mentioned earlier about a Leeds-style Kirklees climate commission, because we had expert evidence given by Professor Andy Goulson, which was quite really interesting actually, about how to kind of lead in strategic change. So that kind of partnership approach where you bring in lots of the different community actors is going to be a very big part of the council's work. We've also got issues around the economic strategy offers many options and opportunities to actually encourage certain behaviours with businesses and so on. And of course, there's also the issue around the work the council does with young people, the education service, and so on. So these are just some of the strategic, you know, kind of triggers, if you like, or ways that we can encourage strategic change. So I hope that helps.
So the Climate Commission, what outcomes are you wanting from the Climate Commission?
Well, we can't choose it.
No, I know what you mean, but if you say we want the Climate Commission, you must know sort of what your intention is in putting that forward.
Achieving the target, the Leeds City Region target. Yeah.
Is that what your Climate Commission wants me to do?
Yeah. 2038, zero carbon by 2038. I assume that would be what we want to lead on. Yeah.
Andrew, do you wish to do that?
There's a few things, but I guess one of the key things is, do we really appreciate the 2038 target? Because it's happened since the climate emergency working group was established. The 2038 target, net zero carbon, 19 years. And 6 years we've got. If we keep going at the same rate, we've got 6 years. We've got 6 years to actually level things out.
Yeah.
So that is incredibly tight.
Yeah.
It's tough. There we go. But anyway, so I wonder if we've really deeply appreciated that. Because 6 years to get everything absolutely under control. It's not, we haven't got till 2038.
No.
We've got 6 years from now to do it. So that's the scary bit. And I don't feel that we have that degree of urgency or misunderstood. Opportunities. Biogas is not something that may happen to us. Biogas is something we can do because, well, we'll do, don't we? They're quiet moments. But we have the opportunity through food waste and things to have partnerships and anaerobic digestion. And so my worry is that we that's just one example. My worry is that we're thinking too much about how things might happen to us as opposed to what we can do. And that's, in some ways, that's been a bit of my worry throughout the process, that we've asked parts of the council to come in and tell us what they can do and things they could do. Sometimes that's come out with some interesting ideas. I worry about capture of ideas in the process that we've had, but I'm hoping that's going to be okay. And in some ways, I think what's the biggest thing that's ever happened to this council in a lot of ways? That's been austerity. And when we've had austerity, we've been like, how do we actually deal with the shrinking council budget? How do we actually deal it in a robust way? And it's been very directive. And we need that sort of approach to carbon budgets. We need to be saying, hang on a minute, sorry folks, this is the budget. This is where we need to cut to. And we don't just need to cut to there, we need to cut much deeper because it's going to be harder to influence our partners. And if we actually get that approach right, then we can pass that on to our partners and give our partners the opportunity, the tools that they'll need to do the same things themselves. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to go first? No. Okay, Albert, you do want to say anything?
Is that alright? So I think you covered some of it actually, Andrew. It was just about it, and I think they are doing some good work. And well done, John. There's not many of you. You kind of you're doing a lot of good work. So thank you for
I agree with that.
the committee as well. It's just, I guess, about the scale of it, as Andrew's mentioned. I think the key thing is making sure that we're working with our partners. That's going to be key. But how do we get them to sort of get them on side? And you've talked about the community wealth building project, building is that, which I think is a good way of doing it. And the other thing is about just building it in with the Leeds City region, where that's going on as well. So the major infrastructure projects, how we're making sure that, I think you mentioned this, didn't you, before, Andrew? So how we're making sure that the work that we're doing is taking account of climate change and our own, blueprint for the towns and into as well. But that's all I want to say.
Building a better road to the airport.
You've got air quality issues, but if you have schemes that actually add to your air quality issues, then can be a problem.
Just wanted to say I was at Combined Factory this morning and they're very seriously looking at green themes and it's going to be embedded. So everything we do as the council, because we're part of the Combined Authority, is aligning our plans, aligning our opportunities and making sure that our anchor partners are at the table being able to deliver alongside the residents, because what I would like to hope that moving towards the future is when we're talking about climate emergency, each and every one of us can say, I can do this, rather than look to somebody else doing it. So it's just making sure that it's always on the agenda and it's embedded, rather than saying, oh, there's a policy somewhere that's telling us how to do it. It's got to be a living document that evolves with changing times and opportunities as well. So I'm really very appreciative of the work that the group is doing and hoping that we're going to produce something really worth hanging on to and moving forward to be the conduit that brings about the climate change and in a way that fast tracks us there rather than stop, start.
I think right to a close. I think certainly we'd like to see this, and I know it's quite easy to do, is rebadge existing projects and put them all together and say, right, this is what we're doing. But have some actual strategic opportunities and looking forward, and far more of that could be true, I think. And more visibility about your partnership working as well. If you're aligning with the city region, how are you aligning with it? What are you doing? And things like that. Draft carbon budget is what we've asked for, and you said you'd circulate the link for that. Figures as well as the percentages for the
Kirklees.
Yeah. And we'll talk about strategic opportunities and timescales, because you have spent, it looks as if from this paper you've spent a long time and you haven't, a draft action plan isn't here. Do you know what I mean?
We've had 3 meetings.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
3
so
meetings.
it's been a long time since March. I
No.
appreciate diaries are difficult.
3 meetings of the group.
But
4.
it's, you need them to come to council at some point, as you said, to you're hoping for. But there needs to be more a feeling of your strategic and your partnership, etc. than what's in here. So hopefully we can work on those in the meantime. Have I missed anything that would be nice to know? No. Carbon budgets I've mentioned. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Management committee. Can we look at the draft work programmes then, please? So, are these ready for?
There's some changes from economy and neighbourhoods because that met after these have gone out.
Right. So these are for the sale and
no, it's come up with some suggestions. So in corporate, there's the issue of place-based working to be resolved. they put in some other stuff. They put in the leaving the EU preparations. That was added to what we've seen previously. Important. Yeah.
So the leaving the EU preparations, it's internally at corporate, businesses at economy and measurements. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. If that's okay. And the place-based item, if we have it here first so we can see where it is across all the directorates, and then we can work on the scrutiny of that.
That is what we told him.
Okay. Okay. Financial scrutiny, Andrew, do you have anything to say on your work plan?
Yeah, we had our initial chat with the lead member, Graham Turner, which was interesting. We had an interesting discussion about commercialisation and kicking ideas about that backwards and forwards, which was entertaining. So yeah, just one meeting. Nice start.
Children's scrutiny, Andrew, have you got anything to say?
I think we did a bit of tidying up. I think most of the issues that were in that work program was really thought through, but it's emphasis that panel members activity that. The visits, we would slightly, given that most of the members of the panel knew a bit more strategic about that, and we would use that as an opportunity to engage with frontline staff, but also as a learning opportunity for us about the work. The learning stuff as well, the presentation on the learning strategy with the person and some things.
And your CAMS transformation plan, there is a potential crossover with health and social care, because the adults as well, there's a knock-on from the children's CAMS to the adults CAMS waiting list as well. Okay, so perhaps let's have a discussion. There's a crossover with adult services.
Yeah.
There's a waiting list in adults as well.
The Ofsted report we'll be looking at the August meeting, because it will be published by then, and we're going to look at the Children's Improvement Board programme in the light of the Ofsted inspection.
Health and adult social care, how would you say anything?
Yeah, we've after last week, instead of the normal meeting, we've had a workshop style sort of participation session with some of the key partners and officers that we're working with, and that proved to be very fruitful, and some very good sort of relationship that came out of that.
Economy and neighbourhoods?
Yeah, so just a couple, we had a meeting on Thursday, so that went quite well in the town centre, in particular. Just a couple things in the timetable. I know the inclusive growth strategy is coming here first, so obviously we'll see what comes out of it here before we think about doing it in ours. And then in terms of the sustainable transport, we have said effectiveness of public transport provision funded by Section 106 monies, but I know you asked about overall, the chair asked about overall still effectiveness of community infrastructure. And then both Martin and John brought that up as well, so happy to look at that. A couple of members just asked about if we could do, where I've got in monitoring, I've got the relationship with KNH and the sleeping strategy. They wanted to discuss that in a little bit more detail in the actual meetings, so I just said, yeah, I'm happy with that, we just need to look at the pipeline and see what we can actually fit in over the next 12 months.
Management Committee draft work plan. So we've had a look at the corporate plan, and flood risk will be coming in March. Regional update, we've had some today, and we'll have some later meeting. We'll look at the place-based working when that was coming. That was from November, but we'll look to see if we can bring that down. Transformation programme, inclusive diversity, that's been before. And Democracy Commission working party, that's potentially to come as well.
It's had some interesting peer review, hasn't it? Some of these recommendations.
But also I wanted to ask about peer review as well, because it might be worth us putting the peer review and the outcomes from the peer review onto a scrutiny agenda to actually follow through as to where we are with working on that peer review. All right. So if we had a conversation as to where that we felt that.
Get chief exec in, legal.
Yeah. Yeah. You see where that goes. Yeah.
Can I have a little point?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So the other thing that one of our, sorry, I forgot to mention before, one of our members asked about was water-based action teams. You know when the action sports come in, but I didn't know if another committee was going to look at that. No. Okay. So we'll try and fit that in with some of the environment stuff that we're looking at. So
yeah, I think that's the sort of kind of thing.
yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Those were good. And scrutiny communications. We're going to try and get a bulletin out. September is the council meeting when we could potentially have scrutiny update. So maybe we need to sort of just highlight maybe one thing from each, because you're not really, by September you just had your work programme in place. So maybe you want to say, highlight something that you'd be taking forward or something like that. We'll work it out. But what I was thinking was, sometimes we get timed out, don't we, at council meetings on the scrutiny item. So having a bulletin in the same time scale, so that they've got something in writing if we get timed out. Yeah?
Yeah, not good.
Yeah, okay.
So a bit best practice. Because again, it seems like in terms of the cabinet members, and actually having just even therefore their key priorities,
Yeah.
rather than talking for 10 minutes about stuff, we can use so we can set the best practice there.
And I'm going to look at the corporate plan as well and just sort of tease out of it a bit where each of the headings would sit within the scrutiny panels for the members to monitor. And that would be interesting. And then we can bring it back later in the year to this committee and we can have a discussion where we are with the corporate plan. Okay. All right.
Okay.
I think we've done the work programme, haven't we then? Date of next meeting, 9th of September. Thanks ever so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.